Okay, and welcome to the last video of the semester. You made it. So for today, I'm going to discuss a couple of the different green building and energy analysis features that exist within Revit. So if we think back to the very beginning of the semester, like one of the first videos I put out, and I introduced the concept of BIM, I explained that it stands for Building Information Modeling. And the real important part of that acronym is the information. So all of the info that we can get out of the building model to then make the most educated and informed decisions for which way the building should be facing, what materials should be used, how construction should go about. All of those different pieces of information we can get out of the model, and we then can present that to the contractors, to the clients, to help explain why something is done and why it's being done that way and why certain materials are being used for it. So I have here again the model of the Eames house, and we'll play around a little bit in it with some of these tools and features. One kind of caveat that's probably going to happen in the model and how we're looking at it is that this was originally modeled using Revit 2014, and that, or at least that's I think the year I did it with. And then I upgraded it to be able to be opened in 2021. And so there might be some pieces of information that didn't follow through um, from the one version to this newer version. Um, If, however, you are doing everything in the latest version, then you don't necessarily have to worry too much about the those pieces of information and materials, and we'll kind of look at some of that throughout today's lesson. Um, but the first thing I want to kind of just look at are the solar patterns and kind of the daylighting analysis that we can get out of Revit. And now I am going to have a couple of issues with it because I am using a computer at the high school, and since it's at the high school, we have lots of different restrictions set on our computers because silly little kids like to look at things that they shouldn't be looking at while on a school computer. So whenever I try to do a solar analysis nowadays, for some reason, it's blocked, um, which is kind of a bummer. Why am I being restricted from looking at a map? I don't know, but I'm not going to question it too much. It's whatever the school wants to do, they want to do. Um, but this was part of your project within your river project, was to look at some of those things regarding the solar analysis. So just to kind of briefly go over them again, you can get to the solar analysis through here, through your sun settings, and I'm just going to turn the sun path on. And what this then is creating a little path of what the sun is looking like on a single day, June 1st, and how that sun path can follow. If I'm going to be looking at a sun path like this, then chances are I also want to turn shadows on. And I'm also going to just go into my hidden elements and unhide all of my trees, even though that's going to lag it out a little bit. It'll help with just kind of doing this really quick shadow analysis of everything. And you can take the sun and you can either drag it along that path, or you can click on, let me orbit around a little bit. Why won't it let me click on that number? Curious. Because usually you can, unless that's a new feature. But I can just kind of drag the sun to see, okay, at different times of the day, how are those shadows then going to be impacting my building? When you're doing a solar analysis, it's always a good idea in the settings for your sun. If you're going to be doing a single day analysis, you want to look at 2 days in particular, the summer solstice and the winter solstice. So you want to see, okay, well, the summer solstice is going to be the longest day Um, the longest day of the year and the sun is at its highest peak versus this winter solstice is going to be the shortest day of the year and the sun is in its lowest area. Now, I have a location set here, and this is the exact location of this particular building, but you can, of course, go and map it. Unfortunately, this is where it's going to give me an error code saying that I can't look at this map. You shouldn't be getting an error code like this. Um, but I know for this particular building, the location, the orientation of the building, everything really that went into it was based around having a lot of daylighting go on. And so if I look at the winter solstice for this building, we can see that when the sun travels at its lowest point, it's going in through lots and lots of these windows so that this way, not only are they getting that passive heat from the sun, but it's also then providing with a lot of daylight, so that this way mechanical or electrical means would have to be used a lot less to light the building inside itself. Versus then on the summer solstice, so that longest day when the sun is at its highest point, the sun is not going beating into the building at all, even when it's earlier in the day. We're still just having complete shaded protection, not necessarily from all of these trees here. There are more trees on this side in reality, but I just didn't model them or place them. But you can then kind of show to a client, well, this is why we oriented the building this way. And you can even do, much like the walkthrough videos, is you can export videos of the solar analysis kind of as the sun runs across. And I can even bring it, or I should be able to bring it to a different day. So if I click here where it said June 21st, I don't know why we're at 2010, but I can bring it to a different day. I could even go to a whole different month and I could say, okay, November 23rd, enter. And now that moved it, so now it's showing me the sun path on that particular day. Um, so you can change that around there, or of course you could just do within your sun settings, you could do a multi-day analysis and you can just look at it throughout the entire year. You can look at it throughout the entire spring, summer, fall, winter. And you can even make your own specific one. So for instance, if you were trying to do a solar analysis for a school and you wanted to provide optimal daylighting for that school, um, for LEED certification or something like that, the summer isn't really something that you are too concerned about when it comes to a building like that, because the building really isn't being occupied that much in the summer. Um, so then you could do a multi-day and you could set it for your own specific time frame that it's really going to be important for. Now, in addition to the solar analysis, my son's all the way there, buried in the trees. But in addition with your solar analysis, you then can do some different energy analysis related to your building. However, that's going to be um, reliant on the fact that you have systems in place, which we didn't go over at all. And we're not going to go over how to place different systems in here. This is something that probably the engineer on the job will be handling. So they'll get your Revit file and you can actually be working in the Revit file simultaneously through that collaborate tab. You can have different work sets where you sign out different parts of the building. And so that this way they can work in one area while you're working in another area. You can have the file open simultaneously, kind of like maybe working in a Google Doc, but a little bit more complicated than that. But within the systems area, you then can put in your different HVAC systems, you can put in all of your different plumbing, and you can then do analysis on things like that, as well as put in any of your electrical parts or pieces. within your structure, but like I said, we are not going to go over that just because, and let me turn the sun off, just because that's a little bit above my wheelhouse. Now, so when we run our analysis, we are going to see a lot of gaps in it purely because I don't have those things set up within my building, but it still will kind of show you how you can run those and once again prove that the choices that you're making are being made for a reason. Now, within all of your different materials and all of your different parts or pieces of your building, you have everything kind of defined. Now, in the Revit project, I didn't go over how to define walls and materials within the walls, the roofs, the floors, but in one of the Revit lessons, we did go over how to do that. So if I click on this roof here, things might not show up when I go into edit type because it was modeled originally in that older version and we're now in this newer version. But so right now I'm looking at the information for this specific roof type, which is a metal deck with some insulation in it. If I go to edit the structure, okay, good, it actually did follow through. Fantastic. Not only is it telling me the actual dimensions of the different pieces of material that are being used as opposed to nominal dimensions. So if I had pieces of wood in here, I wouldn't have that 2x4 defined as 4 inches. I would have, or 2 inches by 4 inches. I would have it defined as 1.5 by 3.5. But I have all of my thickness here, which is just going to be important for measurements when regarding construction. But I also have all of my different materials defined. And as those materials are defined in AutoCAD, or rather Autodesk, excuse me, we're getting different pieces of information based on their physical properties that'll then help us make decisions for the energy analysis of the building. And so if I look here for my rigid insulation layer, and I then click on that ellipses to look at more information about it, not only does it have just which patterns would get associated with it when looking at it in a section view, because since Revit is kind of a smarter architecture software, it knows that rigid insulation is being shown with that pattern. I could, of course, go override that and give it a different pattern if I wanted to, but it also has just different pieces of its physical properties. So how strong is it? What are its thermal capabilities? And then information regarding just its thermal properties in general. And if I had maybe a custom material that I was applying and it wasn't preloaded in to the Autodesk materials library, but it's something that I just happen to know or find from the manufacturer's website, all of the different thermal properties, I can go and edit it, which should be from, I guess right there, yeah. So then I can come here and Autodesk has lots of different just physical assets or thermal assets related to typical materials. I can search for materials too. So if I wanted to say that instead of this being rigid insulation, it was made out of some type of wood, not only for just searching for wood gives me the thermal properties, but they've even broken it down by different types of wood because those are going to have different thermal properties. They're going to have different R values and things like that. So you can really get down to a lot of different details when it comes to that. But I'm just going to leave this as expanded polystyrene because that's what we're going to say my material is. And so then I have information about its R value. And when I go run an energy analysis, I'll get a more accurate number. Now, again, some of the numbers are not going to come up great for this just because it is an older model being loaded into a newer one. And so for instance, if I look at this panel here, I right click and I say select panel. I don't think I have anything. Yeah, so for material, I just have it like applied as default material just because I wasn't planning on doing any energy analysis. And therefore, like there is Well, actually, that's weird because they have put a heat transfer and an R value. Um, so I guess they're saying it's made out of some type of metal. I'm not gonna sit and debate with it. I do have like the mullions applied as aluminum, and that all of the little panes of glass are glass. And I know some of you might even be thinking like, oh, well, then the energy analysis for this building is going to be horrendous because since this also is an older building, I'm pretty sure it's just single paned glass. Um, and like, so yeah, there's gonna be a lot of heat transfer in this building. Um, the thing to consider though is that this building exists in Southern California. And so they are not really too concerned with that heat transfer the way that we are here in Boone, just because they want that air to be able to leave and exit and flow out of the building rather easily. Most of these also are windows that can open so that this way air can flow through it. So that for them is something that's very different for here in Boone, because in Boone, I want the tightest envelope to my building as possible so that this way in the winter I can spend as little money as possible on things like heating and cooling it. Um, but enough with that little rant. So then the next thing I can look at is just an overall kind of analysis of the building. And again, as I mentioned, it's going to look a little bit wonky, but that's okay. And there's kind of two main ways to look at that. They've built a way into the 2021 version of Revit, and I've only played around with it a few times. So just kind of bear with me as we learn it together a little bit. But in the Analyze tab, there's the energy optimization options where you can again apply a location. So you can do this in that solar study, but you can also apply a location directly here. Um, I'm not going to be able to, which is kind of poopy, but you certainly can. And then we can create an energy model, which is just going to define our spaces or our volumes within our building and create an analytical model to look at. It says it takes a while, but in all honesty, it doesn't. Or at least for my computer, it doesn't, but maybe that's just for my computer. And what essentially it's done is it's figured out the different volumes of my building, but it's also broken it down by different materials as well. So we can see where the different ceilings are located. We can see where different windows, so panes of glass, are going to have a different um, energy properties than those pieces of aluminum, than those metal panels. So it has broken them down into the different areas at least, and it's created just kind of a separate 3D view over here regarding that. Now, in this tab as well, we can look at a systems analysis. My issue here is because I don't have any HVAC systems in my building, we can try to run this report, but I don't really think I'm going to get anything out of it. So it's running a report. It'll show up down here. And it just is still going to tell me it's calculating. Once this icon finishes, I guess my calculation will be done. I don't know what it's calculating since I don't have any HVAC systems present, but we'll see. Um, but I can also do just kind of an energy simulation report for the building itself. And they're going to both just run in the background, and I'm going to pause the video and unpause once they're finished. Okay, so the HVAC report is done. The annual energy report is still running. And my guess would be it's one of the reasons is that I do actually have lighting systems in this building model, and that's why it's taking a little bit more time. So this HVAC report that got run, we can see that I've got quite a lot of tabs. Oh, yeah, it's done. We'll look at that then next. is I have a lot of tabs that are currently saying 0. And that is again because I do not have any HVAC systems installed. So that's why I'm going to get a lot of, well, no energy is being used on here. But just to kind of show you what these reports can offer when you have all of those things loaded in, is that it can tell you just generally about your building, how much is being used for heating, cooling, for electricity, all of these other different areas. And then um, unless it's in this report, which let's see. So if we go in here, yeah, we can see in this report too just how much energy was being used for interior lighting versus interior equipment, for cooling, for electricity. We can see for each month, and really because the only thing I have installed are some pieces of interior equipment, and that's like kitchen things as well as just lights. Those are the only energy consumption things I'm seeing on a month-to-month basis. But if I had other things installed, then we could also see how much they're being used. We can look at a table as well for how much energy is being consumed, and they're just doing it based off of the typical amounts for what would be happening in that area. Um, as well as then just how much is being, so again, how much is being used in each different area, and then there should be towards the end some analysis related to like a lead report. So yep, here we have a lead summary. So then you can even look at all of the different areas of lead and how your building is performing in those areas. So we can see based on our performance, if I had any PV panels on my site or any, maybe I had a gray water system installed, I can see how much water then I'm saving. So if LEED is something that I'm interested in putting into my building, or a carbon or a net zero goal is something that I want for my building, I can perform these analysis beforehand, before construction ever begins, and then I can make those decisions. Because the thing that exists with LEED is when you're looking at that LEED scorecard, you know before construction ever starts, and usually when the bidding process for who is making that building is in play, the client knows that they want LEED certification and that they want it to be LEED silver or LEED gold. Like they know beforehand, it's not something that just kind of happens and pops up at the end of just like, hey, we think we did a pretty good job. Maybe we should try out to get this LEED certified. Um, you usually know exactly what level of LEED you're aspiring for, and even which areas you are planning on getting your points for. Um, and then when you apply for the LEED certification, you have to provide all of these justifications for why you got those points associated with daylighting. And you can then use these reports to say, well, we're saving X amount of electricity because we can see from the solar analysis that we're getting plenty of natural light exposed from from the south and things like that. So these reports can be very helpful. Of course, it was going to make you have to make sure then that you have all of those systems in place. And as the architect or the designer, it's usually not your field to put all of those systems in place, but just that they're here and that they can do some pretty cool things. Additionally, sure, let's save. We can look at some optimization in there so we can play around with some numbers and figure out what is going to be used in which areas, and without having to make big changes to our building, just see if one thing changed and one thing didn't. Typically, and it unfortunately opened up on a different tab, which is not what I wanted it to do because I actually had it opened here. But it started out as this thing called Green Building Studio, and they've kind of moved away from Green Building Studio into this new tool called Insight. And within Insight, so I'll just say I want to create a new one. Why won't it let me load in my model? That's weird. Hello? That's my little Revit demo, but why won't you let me load in a new model? Add models, or do I wonder, am I only allowed to have one model because I'm on an education version? One moment, I'll figure it out for you. Okay, I think I might have figured out what I did. I might have skipped a step. So first, I believe I need to generate an energy model, and it's telling me that it's currently out of date, so I'll say update it. Okay. And now I should have an updated energy model. I should. And then I'm going to click on optimize. And here we go. Yes. So I skipped a step. Whoopsie daisies. Um, and it might just take a little while for it to load for me here, but then I can look at my model itself in comparison to a couple of different scenarios. So again, if I was trying to do something for net zero, they have all of them like kind of the optimized settings for what a building would need to have if it was considered to be net zero. Or if I was doing the 2030 challenge, I could then also kind of look at some LEED certifications. But let's see here if I can open up my model, and it's just saying that it's in progress, so I can't probably open it until it finishes loading in. And this is a bit heftier of a model than that little Revit demo that I had practiced with a couple of weeks ago. So I'll pause again until it's loaded. Okay, and so now I have my model here, and I can look at some different things associated with it to help um, reduce my building footprint. So I can look at how much it's going to cost and just try to make this score essentially um, as, because this is the cost per square meter per year. I'm going to just try to make that as small as possible by just playing around with those numbers. And so I can see here for my building orientation, this is what I currently have my building orientation set at in Revit. However, they're telling me that if I alter it, that I can reduce my energy costs. So that would then tell me that, hey, I should consider altering my building orientation to make my just building a little bit more energy efficient. And then I can also look at for my windows of just kind of, well, how, like what type of windows do I have set up? Whoops. So that's your window wall ratio, which parts of my walls are just glazed glass versus the actual wall itself. You'll notice in my building that most of it is. And for me personally, and probably the Eames would agree, um, is that the fact that this is building is all curtain walls and all of those glazed windows is kind of the point. So I maybe don't want to change this too much. However, I could definitely add in like some shades on the south side of the wall, or even just make a um, put an overhang. Why couldn't I think of it? Just a further overhang on that south side to help kind of reduce that glare coming in. Some of the numbers you'll notice that they're not going to alter or change too much, so you might not want to really bother with them. But sitting in the Insight tool, you can kind of just go and look at what kind of exists versus what we could change and how we can change it to keep our energy costs down as much as possible. And so some things too, they're going to be making some assumptions on. So based on my roof construction, like my roof construction is not going to get, if I change it to be 10 1/4 inch SIPs, I'm not really going to be saving that much money per square meter per year. So like for me, again, not really something I'd be too interested in. Daylighting and occupancy controls, adding things like that in. So just features that will just maybe sensors that will turn the lights off if there's X amount of natural light coming in. So we have that here in the high school as we have sensors by the windows that if you turn the lights on, they'll adjust and they'll dim the lights based on the natural light coming in so that this way the room isn't overly lit. Changing things like my plug load efficiency and just trying to, again, just make that number as small as possible so you can then make those educated um, statements pretty much to your client saying like, okay, well, you really want to try to go for this with your lighting efficiency. It's going to cost more initially, but in the long run, you're going to save X amount of dollars. So the fact that now I'm saving $10 per square meter, it's going to kind of help reduce it quite a lot. Now for operating schedule, this is just saying, is it a building that's being used 24/7 versus a building that's being used 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week? Yeah, I could save a whole lot, but I mean, I can't really change the operating schedule of my building if it's like by just saying, oh, well, you really should only stay open 5 days a week because you're going to save so much more money energy wise, especially if it's like a single family house. Then that's not really something you could sit and alter and play around with. Um, and then PV panels, I don't have any PV panels on here, but I do have, and we can look at, because I actually just remembered, where's my Google Drive? I actually have for this building some things before Insight became Insight, and it was called Green Building Studio, which still exists. Um, so, do I have this up on the screen? Sorry. So I actually played around with Green Building Studio and this particular building for it. Um, and some of the things I said, of site orientation for this building, while it does not have very optimal site orientation, they were very intentional with how the building was placed based on where it's located. So does it have the optimal orientation? Absolutely not when it comes to a solar analysis. But sticking, or the Eames, their kind of philosophy was that the classic architecture mistake is to find a beautiful site and to just level it and stick your house right in the middle. So they kind of built their house intentionally into the side of the hill for things like that. Um, but some things that I did look at within Green Building Studio was what would happen if you improved that glass insulation, because it is just currently single pane glass. So you are getting a lot of that heat loss. If you are using mechanical means to cool the building in somewhere like Southern California, you'd want to potentially put in, double pane windows at least, and you could save a big amount. Um, Also, just with some passive solar things of just in this scenario, I extended So in the Revit model itself, I just extended the roofs to have a um, just a bigger overhang to then kind of provide a little bit more protection from that high sun in the summer. It also allows more drainage and then can save additional amounts of money. So this is not something that I could necessarily show in Insight, but after I went into the model, remodeled what it looked like, then came back into Insight or Green Building Studio, and then I could see those improvements. Again, if I put PV panels on it, since it is in Southern California, there's a lot of natural sunlight available. And if I just stacked these PV panels onto the roof, how much could I reduce it, and then do some calculations um, based on how much would get um, kind of generated. Now, I do have a different calculation than what Green Building Studio or what Insight told me. So I went and calculated myself based on the site. Okay, if I had this many PV panels, what would that be? I feel like they greatly overestimated how much it would generate because I think they were operating under the most ideal, pristine conditions, not a single cloud in the sky, any day of the year. Um, so my calculation came out a little bit, what I think is a little bit more realistic. Now, these results were with a software, or rather a plugin extension for Revit called Tally. And so Tally is a plugin for Revit in which you can do a life cycle analysis of the different materials that are being used. And so each one of these colors is representing a different area. So the floor, the roof, the ceilings, the walls, the glass. But it's taking into consideration the kind of gathering of the material, of how that material is sourced, how that material is then manufactured into the final product, how it is transported to the site, the upkeep or maintenance for the material, and then whether or not it could be um, reused or recycled at the end of its life. And so from my original analysis of the building, my big areas were the types of insulation that I was using. Metal was a big problem, and so was glass. And so then I kind of just changed around, okay, well, if I was to use this material instead of this one, could I reduce some of those issues or those impacts? Um, if I, added things like fly ash into that concrete slab, would that help? If I switched off my insulation into ones that maybe had a better end of life cycle, but also could last longer in the building. Um, and then again, some of the things that I looked at were just kind of how can I change some of those different materials around. Metals are really hard to change around just because a lot of those environmental impacts of metal come in that manufacturing stage of just creating the materials themselves. But once they're in the house, they don't have too much of an environmental impact, and they're also necessary. I'm not saying that you should, not insulate your building, because that would ultimately be the greenest way to go because you need that insulation in there. But Tally is a great plugin to kind of help play around with some of those things. They they honestly still might have a free um, student version available. You have to email them and say like, hey, I'm using this for educational purposes and I would just want to kind of look at these. But other than that, it does cost money. Um, and I'm not going to tell you guys to go buy it by any means. Um, but it was just kind of an interesting way of looking at the different materials. And we can see here that, okay, I believe, does this tell me here now? I want to say that it's either the yellow or the orange is the metal. I should have put the legend in here. Um, but I can't 1,000% remember. But one of these for sure is talking about the different metals within my building. And I can then greatly reduce, the impact that maybe, insulation or glass is having, and then it's just going to seem like my metal's having a bigger impact. So you can play around with some of those numbers. Everything is going to have an impact no matter what. Nothing is going to have a zero. This is never going to come out to just an empty bar. The whole point is just to see how those different materials are affecting it. Um, But yeah, that's just another feature that you could use. Green Building Studio is what we used to use. So that's what in this little presentation here, where some of these little screenshots, they're just coming out of Green Building Studio. Um, and we saw in Insight here, which that's not it. Da, 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 da. So this is exactly what Green Building Studio used to look like until they then kind of phased Green Building Studio out and started using Insight instead. Why? For what? I don't know, to be honest. Um, but Green Building Studio also used to rely heavily on those GB XML files, and they still are a lot of third-party apps outside of Revit that will use those GB XML files. So again, the way you export those, so you did have to do one of those for your Revit project. And when you do File, Export, GBXML, and then now I have the option to just use those energy settings and those spaces and models that I made for those different analytical things and for Insight. But I could also say use my spaces and volumes. Blah, 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 blah. Approximates the volume. Sure. And I can say what type of building it is, because that's going to have an effect on it. Spaces, maybe. Let me do this instead. It could be because I don't think in this building I ever defined that, so I'm just going to use the energy settings. There we go. And then it's just exporting it as this XML file, which can't be opened on your computer. So if I try to open it, chances are, and I've got 1.5 trillion tabs open, but when I try to open it, I figured it was going to try to open it in Excel, um, but it opened it instead in Microsoft Edge, and it's just like this big heap of mess of all of these different coordinates. This is essentially just a code for software like Green Building Studio or other third-party um, plugins out there to then take this, read it, and kind of decipher it into something that says what something like Insight can give us. Um, and so we can use things like Insight again to then help us make all of those different decisions. Because of all of the different information that we have in our model regarding just its location, the materials being used, and all of that wonderful stuff. The more information you have built into your model regarding not only those materials, but those different systems, your plumbing system, your HVAC system, your electrical system, your MEP format, the more information you have in that model, the more accurate you can get those different analysis coming out of it. But like I said, not only do we just not have time in this course to go over all of those different things, I do not have the know-how to do all those different things. I think I might have ever used the HVAC system, just the mechanical equipment one, in here once before, ever before, and then never again. Um, and so with that, that's how you can just do some quick green building analysis for your models in Revit. So your Revit project model is due today, the 26th. So make sure you're getting that done. And then your final project is due on May 7th by 11 p.m. at the latest. And I will still have office hours for this week. And will I have them next week again too? Sure, I'll do them again next week as well, but there will be no videos or lessons or anything for next week. So thanks so much for watching, for stopping in each week. I know this was not an easy semester, so I appreciate you guys putting your efforts forth and doing as best as you possibly can. And remember, if you have any questions, I'm always just an email away.